It seemed like a reasonable question. And it would have been had it been directed to anyone else but me. She asked me, "Will you come to church with me this Sunday?" Now, truth be told, I was flattered. I reasoned, she wouldn't have asked me if she didn't like me, would she? I think she likes me. My problem was, I didn't do church. I hadn't been to church for at least 35 years. I was agnostic. I would have been an atheist, but denying the existence of God involved a certain amount of risk. In case I was wrong. The God I might have denied was a dangerous God. And I'd never been noted for taking risks. In any case, I was against religion. I thought good religion was an oxymoron. Church was not in my comfort zone. I really didn't want to go to church that Sunday, but she was nice. She was pretty. She was blonde. If blondes really had more fun, I wanted to be in on it. I said, "Sure, I'll be happy to go to church with you." Well, that comment about happy made my nose grow a little longer. But I did go to church with her, so it wasn't an out-and-out lie. Now, not too long ago, Sepp told us how he got into Unity. Well, this is how I got into Unity. The difference is, I didn't know I was getting into Unity. I didn't know I was getting into anything. I sure didn't intend to. And I definitely was not looking for a church. Now, before we went, Beth asked me if I knew anything about Unity. And I told her I didn't know what Unity was, but I had heard of it. That was true. I had heard of Unity. When I was 9 or 10 years old, a new Unity church was built on a vacant lot just around the corner from where I lived. And I knew it was a Unity church because it had a big sign that said, Unity Church. Now, there had been a big circus tent on that lot. Regular revival services had been held there. So I figured that the revivalists had finally gotten enough money to build a church. They'd probably hold revivals in that church. Well, I didn't know what a revival was, but I wasn't having any. I dreaded the coming Sunday. I knew I wouldn't like church. I'd have to sit like an idiot among a bunch of people with whom I had nothing in common. Should I pretend to agree with everything that was going on so I could make a good impression? Or should I be myself, be authentic? Now, I hope you're proud of me. I stepped way out of my comfort zone that Sunday, and I did it for the purest of motives. Some guys will do anything to impress a blonde. So, here I am. And now you know why. The church turned out to be an amazing experience. When I walked into the building with Beth, I immediately found myself the center of attention. And the next thing I discovered was that a whole bunch of women I'd never met were lined up to hug me. It was later in the service that I was told, heaven is here and now. Get used to it. And my greatest revelation came with the sermon. I did have something in common with the people, even the minister. Unity was unlike any church experience I'd ever had. They told me that God was not a guy in the sky keeping track of my sins so that he could send me to hell. In fact, they told me I wasn't a sinner, and any hell I experienced would be my own creation. They said I could create my own heaven on earth if I put my mind to it. And it was a big surprise to me when I realized that I'd been nodding my head for the last 15 minutes. I learned later that in Unity they don't call it a sermon, they call it a truth talk. Now, this whole thing reminds me of how I became a runner. My high school cross-country team was short one runner to count as a team, and the coach begged me to come out so that the team could compete in the first race of the year. Now, running 3 miles without stopping certainly didn't appeal to me. Sounded like an hour of agonizing pain. Now, I'd always wanted to be an athlete, but my 98-pound body wouldn't have survived a single football play. I had no talent for basketball or baseball, so I gave in to pressure and agreed to run that first race. After that, they would need to recruit someone who was not as smart as I was. That would be it for me. Well, that was in 1952, and it was agonizing, but it didn't take an hour, and I'm still running after 64 years. Do you think some of my preconceived ideas about running didn't make much sense? So, I had expected. Sunday, one and done. And here I am, not only still in Unity, but standing at this pulpit after 21 years. Now, I hadn't been in Unity very long before they told me that God had created me with 12 powers, that it would allow me to co-create with God that heaven on earth they said I could have. You know what they are. Reverend Catherine's told us about 10 of them. Perhaps you remember. Just in case, they're faith, love, strength, wisdom, power, imagination, understanding, will, order, and zeal, which we also call enthusiasm. Those are the first 10. Who would have dreamed I had them all? Now, according to Unity tradition, the 11th power is usually renunciation. And I question the logic of this order. Common sense suggests that renunciation should be the first power we deal with. Doesn't it make sense to get rid of some of our old preconceived ideas before we can grow into the new ones? Now, you might guess from my story that I walked into that Unity church with a lot of preconceived ideas. And on one of our earliest outings together, Beth asked me, "What's your life's dream?" I couldn't think of an answer. I did my best to give her an honest answer. I said, "All my dreams are in the past. I've lived the dreams that came true, but not many of them did." Do you think Beth noted any negativity in my answer? How about you? Do you think some of my preconceived ideas didn't make much sense? Well, Beth must have been very tolerant, or she must have seen something in me I'd never seen. We're still together. Do you think I possibly could have grown into the person you see standing here if I had not renounced some of my old preconceived ideas? Originally, Unity's co-founder Charles Fillmore called this power elimination. More modern Unitics have changed it to something a little less physiological. Now it's renunciation. Others call it release. Now, Swami Beyondananda calls it defiling, or getting rid of some of the files in your mind. I like release. It suggests that we don't have to aggressively renounce our old beliefs. We just have to let go of them. We say it all the time. Let go. Let God. Now, how many of you have noticed that bumper sticker on Cindy's car? It says, "Don't believe everything you think." Now, that bumper sticker's provoked me into revisiting some of the things I used to think. I've already mentioned my agnosticism and the idea that all my dreams were in the past. I grew up in a family that worshipped at the shrine of lack and limitation. I didn't expect much, and so I was never disappointed when I didn't get much. I'd never heard of prosperity consciousness. I looked young for my age, I was skinny, and I had bad complexion. I didn't expect to be attracted to anyone, and so I avoided social gatherings. I learned to feel uncomfortable when I couldn't avoid them. I just didn't feel worthy. I wouldn't have met Beth if a colleague hadn't introduced us. Now, running was the only activity where I had ever experienced success, and now I'd become too old to succeed. My life dreams were all in the past. I was not aware that I had anything to live for. I wasn't suicidal, but death didn't seem all that bad. I could take it or leave it. I believed what I was thinking. That's when I met Beth. God works in mysterious ways. Now you've heard my confession. I was carrying around a lot of negativity, and I couldn't carry it all in my mind, so I had to carry the overflow in an imaginary big black bag I had slung over my shoulder. It was so stuffed that it was dragging on the ground behind me, making it even more difficult to lug. Now, I learned that this was a problem the first time I heard Beth give a truth talk. She hadn't yet become a minister or even a licensed teacher. Her dream was to become a Unity minister, and to get some practice, she signed up for a regional guest speaker list. It was in Modesto, California, that I heard Beth tell a congregation how this big black bag keeps so many of us from realizing our dreams. And it made me wonder, is she speaking only to me? Now, a subsequent truth talk explained to me what I needed to do to get rid of my big black bag. The speaker quoted Unity's co-founder, Charles Fillmore. He said, "The beliefs that you and your ancestors have held in mind have become thought currents so strong in their course in you that their course in you can only be changed by your resolute decision to entertain them no longer." I needed to make a resolute decision to stop entertaining some of the thought currents I'd been carrying in my big black bag. I could do this, I learned, because God had gifted me with the power of renunciation. Now, the Reverend David Williamson, in the book The 12 Powers in You, explained to me that release or renunciation is my ability to give a no thank you response to the untrue, undesirable, or worn out. It's my ability to forgive, free myself, break bad habits, not be controlled, and let go. Now, release uses the vacuum principle by letting go of mental and physical stuff so that God has space and place to be realized. Now, Charles Fillmore illustrated the point this way. He said, "Thoughts are things. They occupy space in the mental field. A healthy state of mind is attained and continued when the thinker willingly lets go of the old thoughts and takes on the new. This is illustrated by the inlet and outlet of a pool of water. Stop the inlet, and the pool goes dry. Close the natural outlet, and the pool stagnates. Or like the Dead Sea crystallizes its salts until they preserve everything they touch. Living old thoughts over and over keeps the inlet of the new thoughts closed." Now, Charles Fillmore practiced what he preached. One day, Charles was teaching a class at Unity Village, and he just made a point when one of his students raised his hand. The student, probably feeling pretty smug, called Mr. Fillmore's attention to the fact that he had previously said something very different about that point. Charles replied, "I reserve the right to change my mind." Now I knew what I needed to do. I could change my mind. And I'd do it too, as soon as I could get around to it. Now, I haven't gotten around to all of it to this day. And the comedian George Carlin explained my problem. He said, "The whole meaning of life is trying to find a place for your stuff. And that homes are merely a place to keep our stuff while we go out and get more stuff." Well, this is the physical stuff. In a recent Science of Mind magazine, Linda M. Potter explained why we're inclined to accumulate stuff. Our stuff has sentimental value. It reminds us of happy times in the past or important people, pets, or places in our lives. We may think we'll need our stuff at some time in the future. It might be worth a lot on eBay in 10 years. And it makes us feel happy and safe. Now, we also accumulate ideas, and we hang on to them for the same reasons. We've always believed them. In fact, sometimes our families had them for generations, but as Cindy's bumper sticker says, don't believe everything you think. Now, the Bible supports Ms. Potter's advice. Genesis chapter 19 tells how the angels of the Lord practically had to force Lot and his family to leave Sodom. It says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters, who are here, or else you will be consumed in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and left him outside the city. And when they brought them outside, they said, flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the plain. In other words, Lot's family needed to leave the past behind. They had to release all their stuff, both physical and spiritual, in order to enjoy God's promises. And we all know what happened when Lot's wife couldn't let go. She looked back and was turned into a pillar of salt. Now, Charles Fillmore wrote that salt's a preservative corresponding to memory. Lot's wife couldn't let go of the past. She couldn't let go of her sensory pleasures. Sodom, in spite of all its wickedness, had been her home, her comfort zone. And that pillar of salt stands near the Dead Sea as a tufa formation to this very day. It was there when the writer wrote the book of Genesis, and it's still there. Who wants to exist as a pillar of salt? Paulo Coelho, a Brazilian novelist and essayist, wrote, stop being who you were and change into who you are. Now, the writer of Genesis could have stated the lesson a little bit more clearly. He said, don't look back. Now, sometimes it helps if we do look back. If we look back because we miss the good old days, we may have a problem. If we acknowledge the past and bless it for its gifts, then choose the stuff that no longer serves us and release it. Then we can, as Miss Potter suggests, move forward with grace and ease. Now, we've all got possessions we can let go of. I've got clothes in my closet I'll never wear. I can't fit anything new in there. Beth says I need to get rid of some things. She says if I donate them, somebody else can wear them. I think I'm going to do that as soon as I can get around to it. Now, we've all got thoughts and beliefs we can let go of as well. Has anyone besides me ever had worthiness issues? Who's ever been told that you aren't good enough? How many of you still believe that? If you are a child of God, created in God's image and likeness, how can you not be worthy? And how well do you follow the 3rd commandment? I know you're familiar with it. It says, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Do you ever use God's name in vain? Now, this may mean more than some of you think it does. You remember the part of the story where Moses asked what God's name was? God's answer is in Exodus 3:14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. God's name is I am. Have you ever said, I am stupid? Or I am poor? Or I am unworthy? How are you doing on the 3rd commandment? Do you think you could release those unworthiness issues? I'm going to if I can get around to it. Now, I know this one doesn't apply to any of you, but some people tend to be judgmental. Remember how Jesus said, judge not? I'm trying not to judge, but with HB2 and the presidential election, it's difficult. It's also difficult to release judgment because it's the way we've been taught. It seems to be part of our culture. Jesus said we should judge with righteous judgment, but we've never had an abundance of righteous role models. I figure that heaven's a way of life when nobody judges anybody else. So I'm going to let go of unrighteous judgment when I get around to it. Now, is there a better way to release judgment and blame than forgiveness? Charles Fillmore used to devote at least a half hour each day just to think forgiving thoughts. And I think it was back in the first or second year Beth and I were here, and I think it was Robert Campbell who gave us our working definition of forgiveness. He said, forgiveness is giving up all hope for a better past. And as Confucius say, to be wrong does nothing unless you continue to remember it. Do you feel guilty if you've fallen short of some of these things? How does guilt feel? Is it possible to experience heaven on earth if you're carrying guilt in your big black bag? The Reverend Jane Beach said guilt's productive only as a call to action. If I need to apologize or otherwise right or wrong, I do so. After that, guilt is non-productive, preventing me from taking healthy care of myself. As soon as I can get a chance, I'm going to release my feelings of guilt. Now, I sincerely hope that none of you is a nihilist. Is it your habit to tear down anything with no plan for replacing it with something better? I thought not. That might make you a terrorist. Therefore, calling exclusively on the power of renunciation is not helpful. You will experience heaven on earth only when you learn to access all 12 of the powers or faculties with which God has gifted you. Then you will live life as it was meant to be lived. Now, how many of you watched the show Extreme Makeover Home Edition? This was my favorite reality show because it never involved the elimination of losers. There were only winners. Now, the show always began by showing the living arrangement of a special needs family. And their home not only failed to provide for their special needs, it was usually dangerous to their general well-being. Now, the plot was an example of extreme renunciation. Giving the family a safe and healthy living environment always required the complete demolition of their old home. Now, I don't know about you, but I experienced a feeling of exhilaration every time I watched the demolition. Then, in a single week, the builders erected a new, safe, and healthy home with special facilities for special needs. It was obvious that this family was about to experience a blessing. At the appointed time, the family stood in front of their new home, but they were unable to see the blessing. A very large bus blocked their view. Now, the bus represents the sum total of the negative thinking and the accumulation of stuff that blocks our view of our blessings. Then the show's host directed the family, the builders, and the onlookers to shout, "Bus driver, move that bus." Now, just imagine that bus carrying away all your negative thoughts and surplus stuff, clearing up your view of the heaven that awaits you. Now, I'm going to move that bus just as soon as I can get around to it. Do you think it's time?
Yes. Move that bus.
Well, as Swami Beyondananda says, we are so concerned with what time it is, we forget it is always now. It is time now to move that bus, so let's all say it. Ready? Together? Move that bus. And so it is.